everyone. It's fabulous to have you all here. Really important topic, this one that's, I guess, become really dear to my heart over the years. I think that as schools have gotten busier places, what's happened over the years is that we've had increased distraction in schools from what really matters. And I'd like to contend to you that what really matters is a cultural imperative. So what schools are looking to do is to connect their purpose to the culture that they build in their school, so that their programs, whether they're academic programs, whether they're social, whether they're mental health, or whether they're wellbeing related programs, have a chance to thrive. And so that's what this webinar is all about today. It's about the work that you need to do as supporters, as system leaders, when you're stepping into schools, and understanding how it is that you can support them to close that gap between purpose and the culture that they're existing in. I had a really interesting conversation with a school that I work with in another state, and they were talking to me just this week about how they've known for a long time that something needed to change, and they've tried to tinker at the edges of an older or existing model. In their case, it was a more punitive and more structured model for dealing with student behaviour and wellbeing, indeed how they were dealing with bullying. And that's obviously the focus of our partnership between Real Schools and TasDoe. And they were saying that what they hadn't done is to realise what really needed to change, which was, instead of to work on the tinkering at the edges, it was to change the model. And they said that until very recently, they hadn't felt confident. They just hadn't felt capable of being able to step into that gap and to pull the purpose and the culture closer together. And I thought it was a really interesting metaphor that they were drawing. They said it was almost like you were trying to build a bridge between two cliff edges and trying to get them to join in the middle, but they felt that they were too nervous that they weren't going to hit that, and that meant they stopped, and they didn't actually keep working to try and make sure that they filled that may close the gap, so that the people could actually move from one side to the other side with that confidence that they were talking about. It took me back, I guess, to a couple of previous positions that I've had, where I guess I've felt that similar challenge. One was when I was a school leader and a system leader, such as you might be in the position of at the moment. I was put in charge of behaviour and wellbeing for the Northern Territory, and I realised that what I was doing was going to each and every school, roughly at the time 158 different schools, and providing support for them from an implicit framework, which meant that I'd walk in, I'd hear their problems, and I'd say things such as, "Have you thought about this?" Or, "At my old school, we tried that." And that actually made me think about the second story, which was when I opened a school as a new principal and new school, and so it was a significant challenge getting it on the same page. And I remember having a 45-minute conversation with my staff just a couple of weeks before we opened, and the 45-minute debate was all about how lunch orders should get to the canteen. And we realised we were wasting some time on rather frivolous issues. A really clever staff member on my team called Danielle put her hand up, and she said, "You know what, I think we need a rule." And the rule was that nobody in the staff was allowed to say "at my old school." Because what we had was 36 staff who came from 35 different schools previously that they worked together, and everybody was just trying to bring the implicit model of their school together, and we were getting a collision that was being highly unproductive, and certainly putting an anchor on change, putting an anchor on design, putting an anchor on their focus on school culture. So that's where we're coming from today, is how we could move from an implicit framework about the way that we help our schools that we service to be able to move forward culturally, and how we can focus our work in the areas that are of the greatest need for them. So I do want to encourage you, I guess, as we start off today, that this is not a webinar, so there's a temptation that even though you're able to see my face on the screen, that to sort of note that it's more a screen than, and when we're in front of screens, we tend to observe, we tend to watch. It's a bit like a TV show. And so there's a temptation sometimes to make today something that you can sit back and relax for maybe 45 minutes or so and just hear what other people have got to say. But it's not a webinar, it's not a TV show, it's a Q&A session, and half of that means we need a queue. We need your questions. And I'm always really mindful of pointing out that Anytime that you step forward, anytime that you make a contribution in an online session like this, you need to push aside the feeling that you might have that you're being selfish and that you're taking up some of the time of the webinar. What I know for an absolute fact is that every single time somebody asks a question and we address that question, that that you're of service not only to yourself but to other people in the room. The problems you face are common, and what we want to do is to share both the commonality of the challenge and, if we can, the commonality of the solution as well. So that's where I come from in terms of the webinar today, or the Q&A session I should say today. Two ways that you can step forward. Number one is that you are able to put your hand up just like an old school regular classroom. If you look on your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see that there's a function there, looks like a little palm of a hand, and you're able to put your hand up and to be able to, and I can unmute you, I can speak to you during the webinar. I'm delighted to have Jessica back on the webinar because I know she's someone who puts her hand up, and that I'll unmute Jessica and she'll explain in detail what it is that she's looking to have us chew on for a few minutes. And we do, and we've sometimes come up with some really important solutions because of the way that Jessica steps into providing the cue so that the answer has some sort of relevance. And the other way you can do it if you're feeling a little shy is through the question box. So you'll see that there's depending on the type of software that you've got in the GoToWebinar control panel, it's either a question or a chat box or something like that there. And if you do go to that question box and just pop a question in, I'm able to go and have a look at it, and I'm able to try and make sense of that, and try and spend some time on it. So hopefully that'll be of benefit to you. So if you are in the room today, know that it is a little old school classroom. I can see you. Not your face, don't panic about that. I can see your name, and so I can see you sitting there, and I'm expecting the people who I can see to step forward and get involved in this learning experience. So I'll spend just a few minutes before I get to the first question, and I'll be honest, it's the only question I got actually sent through previous to the webinar, to the Q&A session today. I'll spend just a little bit of time, if I may, just talking to that explicit framework that I use when looking to support schools in their moving forward. And I guess what I try to do is there are three areas that I try to pay the most attention to before I step into partnership with a school that I'm trying to build such a culture that we go from current state to desired state, and we believe that in desired state there's a higher likelihood of success. So what's the gap between desired state and current state? It's action. And so it's how can we design action that rows the boat in the direction of current state. And so what I'd like to do is to think about these three key areas that encourage the boat to move a little quicker in the right direction. And the first one is buy-in. So what I find a lot of schools do when they look to try and implement a program, or they look to make a change in the way that they're designing their educative offer, is that they'll do something like train their people on how to do it. They'll tell their people what to do, but what they're missing is the opportunity to, at the very beginning here, is to sell them on why. Simon Sinek does a fabulous TED talk that some of you may be familiar with, where he unpacks Apple's sales model, and he contrasts it against the approach that's used by telemarketers who ring you at 6:30 at night from another country. And what he does is to point out to people that Apple are very big on communicating their why. Their why is about helping people to have technology that makes their lives simple and better. And so they communicate that, and they make sure that that's the big thing that people know about Apple. They just happen to also do computers and tablets and phones. And once they sell us on the why, we're more likely to do the what that they're looking for. I know that when I'm working with schools and they're looking to implement, say, an approach like restorative practices, and I advocate very strongly for that as an approach that can really sit as the underpinning platform of a school's entire culture. But when I do the training with a school, what I do is I barely mention restorative practices until after recess, until after morning tea. And it's because I spend the first hour and a half, 2 hours of the time that we work together making sure that the why is done. I unpack for people why it's important to focus on school culture, why it's important to identify practices in ourselves and that are potentially not rowing the boat in the right direction of that culture, why it's important to identify resistance in ourselves, why it's important to know what we mean by school culture. I often run an exercise where I say to people, you know, put your hand up if you think that school culture matters, and of course everyone puts a hand up. And then I ask them to keep that hand there, because I then ask them to, you know, because you just keep that there, because randomly I'm going to select one of you to come out the front of the room and to tell us what you think the correct definition of school culture is. A lot of hands go down. And what it is a lack of confidence. We know about the what, but we don't know enough about the why that we're even clear about what it is we're talking about. So helping people to build focus on the importance of a step forward is far more important at the start than taking the first step. Otherwise, we just find metaphorically that step is often taken in the wrong direction, and then people are disappointed when they end up in a different destination. So really important that we sell people on the why. The second thing that I think schools are looking for, this is kind of the how part for me, is capacity and growth. So schools are not looking for additional workload. They certainly will tell you that they have enough to do. I don't walk into any of the partner schools that I work with and have them tell me that, you know, the problem is we're twiddling our thumbs. We just haven't got enough to, you know, occupy our time. They'll tell you they've got plenty to do. They'll tell you they're busy. They'll tell you they're tired. And I'll tell you that the thought of squeezing in one more program is just something that makes them a little bit sick to their stomach. What they're looking for is an increase in capacity to run what it is they've already chosen to do. So they're looking for support from you in how they can grow their people effectively, how they can get them past barriers, how they can get them to drop anchors that are currently stopping them from becoming better as teachers. When I do work with teachers, I'm often asking them who thinks they're finished, who thinks they've nailed this teaching thing now and there's nothing else they need to learn. And of course, no hands go up in that instance. Everyone does see themselves as a lifelong learner. And we hope that we're going to continue to get better at teaching as we move forward. So what they're looking for is for people who can provide advice about how to harness that intention, how to get people who say, right, we do want to get better. What is it that you need to get better at first? Sometimes that's not necessarily about addressing clear and present needs, but it's about getting a quick win. It's about taking what we call an economist mindset, which means when we take an economist mindset, what we do is we say not just what could we get done, because sometimes you can go to a lot of effort to get a minor improvement. And the economist mindset says, what's the activity we could choose that has the highest ROI, the highest return on investment? And when we do that, we say, well, there might be some little things that we could do that would get us a big reward. I know that when I've had teachers, for instance, who wanted to improve their classroom practice, they might say to me that they want to improve their behaviour management. I could throw a whole heap of resources at them that could be expensive. I could provide professional readings that they don't have the time to engage with. Or I could schedule for one fortnightly visit to a teacher whose practice they rate incredibly highly across a whole term. And I'll release that teacher to get that done. At the end of it, we're going to have a lunch together and we're going to have a chat about what it is that you learned and what it is that you're going to implement from that time. The action is what allows me to get to grow capacity. And so sometimes when we strain for goals is where sometimes goals can be really unuseful. We struggle for a goal like get better at behaviour management, but we don't put in place binary actions that allow people to genuinely take an idea and grow from it. And I think that we miss, particularly when it comes to culture, particularly when it comes to behaviour in our schools, I think we miss an opportunity to not only be able to thank and congratulate people for doing the things that we put in their performance plans, but we miss an opportunity to have them benefit from the greatest professional learning available, which is to see other people teach. Our schools, unfortunately, are often built like egg cartons, and it's very difficult to see other people teach. So if we provide that opportunity, almost reminding myself that good teaching is often 90% theft, and if we can provide the opportunity for that stealing to happen, then people are often eternally grateful. And it's only then that I think that schools are looking for the sort of help that sometimes we walk in with a default around, which is about implementation. So the one about buy-in is about why, the one about capacity and growth is about how. And then implementation is about what it is that you're going to get done. I think we walk into schools often as supporters, as school system leaders. We walk into schools often too quick, ready to implement. And that's because we come from that implicit framework. Why don't you do what we did at my old school? Why don't you do what I saw a school do down the road? And then we wonder why they don't get going. And the truth is that we haven't established the why, and we haven't commenced a capacity and growth improvement agenda that means that people will be able to get better and experience more success as they implement. What I would like to do is to suggest to you 4 key components that sit within any clever implementation plan, particularly one that talks to school culture, and particularly one that looks to try and prevent and mitigate the risks associated with bullying. So the four components that I think sit within healthy implementation are: number 1, discussion and learning opportunities for staff. So with our partner schools, what we do is we map out across each term of the school 3 to 4 key actions that are going to happen in that term. So we, for instance, will provide professional learnings, we'll provide videos, we'll run webinars, we'll provide ebooks, and what people are looking for is bite sizes. So in a lot of our partner schools, every term they will have one staff meeting with an agenda item for 15 minutes where they take one of the real school's professional learnings, and we have so many articles available to you now to be able to supply schools with through the website that we've built together, which I believe has just recently had a soft launch, which is just fantastic. And so a lot of the articles in there can serve as impetus for conversation. So we get people to sit down and read the article and then maybe have a 7-minute discussion about what are the implications of the thinking in that article for us here at our school. They might have a video that they watch. We might survey confidence and competence. We might do it again later in the year to see if we're making ground. We might have wine and cheese festivals. I know that a couple of schools that I work with, once a semester, they have a wine and cheese festival on a Friday afternoon. They watch one professional learning video together. Everyone in the room has the right to pause it if they wish to, so they control how long the session goes. And we just have a good chat about practice. We have a good chat about culture, because it's the dialogue and the sense making around that makes all the difference. So column 1 for us in any great behaviour, any great school culture implementation is around discussion and learning opportunities for staff. Column 2 for us is around school community. Parents are either going to be a support or they're going to be an anchor on the improvement agenda for the school when it comes to culture, and that's understandable because they don't get the training. So their point of reference is their own school experience, and that often was some time ago, and schools were a very different landscape then. So they will resist our changes unless we plan to communicate heavily with them. I'm often talking to schools about the rule of 6, which is what radio stations use. And that rule of 6 is that what they need to do, you would be aware of when a new song comes out, it feels like it's being played every second song on the radio. Because what they're trying to do is to get you to hear it 6 times. After you've heard it 6 times, familiarity exists, even if you don't like the song, and the likelihood of you tapping along on the steering wheel to that song's completion, when you'll stay for the ads, which is how they get paid, is increased. So what we need to do is to provide, regular touch points for parents, where we just don't say because we talked about this in a newsletter once that we've now told the parents. We don't say because we spoke about it at assembly once that we've told the parents. What we're going to do is use all of the communicative channels, social media. And we did a webinar in this series about how to set up a Facebook page for your school. We use text message services, apps, all the different communication tools with a build once, deliver often mentality. And if we can do that, then parents will go, that's that, for instance, restorer stuff they've been talking about. And that's a different level of compliance with what you're trying to do than, this is ridiculous. Don't you need to go back to the old school like when I was at school? Because what we do with our expertise that we keep drip feeding out to the community is we change our status as experts. People start to trust us, which is just fabulous when that happens. So school community, column 2. Column 3 is behavioural. It's about the shifts that we're looking for in ourselves, the language shifts that we're looking to make, the practice shifts that we're looking to make. In restorative practices, we talk a lot about how and when we'll be implementing circles, how we'll be tackling conflict, what language will we be using as we move across the year, what will we see, and then we target also what we want to see in our students. So it's a behavioural shift for all that we're looking to manage in column 3. And then in column 4, we're looking at programming and planning. So programming is about how it is that our teachers then are becoming explicit. I began my little rant here about us talking about how we can work from an explicit rather than implicit, just an experiential framework. And what we want our teachers to do is to get to the point where they're planning for how they're going to practice, not just what they're going to teach. And then the planning part of it is about, for all of our schools, how does this help me comply with something that I already have to do? So if it's in my strategic plan, how is it that the work we're doing culturally is ticking that off and then complementing the other parts of our strategic plan? We've had schools that we've worked with who have very clearly made tied their goals not only to, for instance, targets around reducing suspension or improving behaviour referral rates, but also directly to student learning outcomes, NAPLAN scores, ATAR scores, things like that, because what we're trying to do with our work culturally is drive a higher level of engagement. And so we need to link our improvement agenda around school culture to our fuller school strategic plan. And that's the 4th column. So that's where I come from in this space. And then what I want to encourage you to do now is to have a think about which part of that doesn't make much sense for me. So what I'm going to do now is give you a moment to think about that and what it is that you might like to ask about that. And I'm going to just, in a moment, I'm just going to unmute Jessica. She wrote a question through before the webinar today that I would like to, I've got to stop calling it a webinar, don't I? Before the Q&A session today, that I would like to read out. And then Jessica, I'll unmute you and ask you to elaborate on that just a fraction. We can get into that. Jessica, right here, I think it can be difficult, not only for different stakeholders to agree on cultural goals and expectations, but also for teachers to agree. It can be challenging when teachers have different expectations and goals for student behaviour. One of the main issues may be consistency, and for new teachers to be inducted into the ins and outs of individual school cultures. Jessica, I'm just going to unmute you. Jessica, have you got me?
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jess. All right, let's hear what are you thinking about there? You've touched on a few important points. What's sitting behind all that for you?
So I'm a first-year teacher. I'm new to this, and I've noticed that sometimes my practice differs from other people's, and it can be hard when you have someone who, just say, for example, let's say class out 5 minutes early, and then your class starts asking you, why can't we go out? And you're like, well, guys, duty of care, you need to stay until the bell. But that just culture, even something as small as that, being in agreement on something like that, and also I think academic expectations are a big one. Like, we love to get work out of our students, but it's hard to sort of encourage them to achieve. And I think every teacher has a different expectation of students.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on a really important point, and I think this is where in schools there are habits that we develop which can be around about formality. So when we've got something to deal with, we tend to go formal, which means we write policy, we build a program, or we call a meeting. They're formal things to do. And unfortunately, when we're talking about culture, and I define culture as being a behavioural set, just the sum total of the behaviours that we encourage and that we tolerate in a school. Unfortunately, that is a big, amorphous, nebulous blob of behaviours that just spreads inconsistently throughout the school. And because of that, because it's so informal in nature, caging it in formal constructs, in rules, in expectations, in flow charts and in tables is fraught. So what we end up doing sometimes is we try to build behaviour charts that say that, so for instance, punching could be a level 2 behaviour. But there's punching and there's punching. And then there's impact or harm that results from that punching that varies widely. So we can say that we've got a hard and fast expectation in our school that if you punch someone, that's 2 lunchtimes. But because of the variations around punching and the variations around the way that people take that, we find ourselves either being inconsistent or being unfair. And that sits at odds with the way that we work. So what's more important is to get some key principles in play about the way that we're going to work. So your example about supervision and yard duty and duty of care is actually a really relevant one, Jess, because a school that I worked with recently, we realised that we were trying to control yard duty with a set of rigid flowcharts and tables. And we said, what if we said that because the majority of the behaviours that happen on yard duty are informal, they're a bit crazy, a bit out there. What we needed to do was to be informal about it. So we got a whiteboard out and we just said, what if there was only 6 expectations, and what if everything here had to be worded informally? And so we talked about some of the things that are common in the formal. And one of the things that's a problem in every school is people showing up on time for yard duty. And we said that isn't it interesting that it's a problem in every school, but it's in every yard duty procedure. The teachers must be present at yard duty at the exact time that they are due to begin yard duty, and they are to stay on yard duty until the exact time that they are finished. But no one was doing it. And it's because it's an informal thing that you're doing, and there's a mismatch. It's only being dealt with formally. So they said, how would it look informally to tackle that? And as a staff, they agreed that, you know what, our statement for this is, we don't rock up late for the party. And that was it. And we wrote it in that box. We don't rock up late for the party. And then we went to the next box, which was dealing with the fact that certain behaviours often seem to happen in the last minute. So we had a box that said, in the last minute, just try one of these things. You know, we had the next one which was a supervision issue. Was what about that stuff that happens when you're not close, or And they said that one of the things the school leaders there were saying, it's such a challenge because some of our teachers go on yard duty, they put the yellow vest on and they stand there like statues. And they said, so we agreed that we're blowflies on yard duty. It's an informal thing to say we're blowflies. We buzz randomly to every particular corner of the area that we're covering. We ended up with these 6 things that we said, you know what, if we all did that, yard duty's going to be fine. And so that became a pictorial representation that went up on the wall, and it means that if someone's in the staff room and it's noticed that they're not, they've forgotten they've got yard duty, that someone can actually say to them, "You're going to be late for the party." They go, "Oh no," and everyone quickly drop their stuff and they go, because it's not as confrontational as when you write it formally. So I think that it's really important for schools to informalise that which they know they can't control, and that's around behaviour and culture. And I think that when we do that, expectations naturally rise. We create the conditions for higher expectations, and the likelihood of people sort of trying to cheat by sending the kids out 5 minutes early, or because it doesn't say anywhere that I can't, is reduced. So I think that taking a different focus is really important. Jess, does that make sense?
Absolutely. I like what you said about context and culture, because I feel like, if we get away from the really strict rules, it sort of empowers teachers to make their own decisions about things and to trust their judgment.
I think so too, and I think that's something that the community tends to trust teachers less than they used to. We've got some issues around trust and respect for teachers, and perhaps one of the first steps that we can take towards improving that is to trust ourselves a little more, to actually put ourselves in a position where we exercise our professional judgment. But because there are so many rules and so many formalities written in policies that have been saved in folders and servers that no one ever looks at, everyone's too scared to make that professional call. And I think that if we can simplify what it is that we stand for and say within that, make a call, make your decision, and then see if it works for you, then we provide a freedom to do some good stuff. But we also provide an accountability for things to, if they don't go wrong, you're accountable then to think of something new. So go and have another crack at it, which I think encourages us to learn from trial and error, which is something that can be a really valuable way to learn.
Awesome. Do you have time for another question?
Go on, Jess, hit me. I can't see any other. I'm just doing a quick check to make sure I haven't missed any others. Can't see any others, so we might as well go for it.
Do you have any, this is a hard one, do you have any basic tips for building a positive classroom culture? I'm thinking things to put in place at the start of the year. I'm very big on high expectations, and I'm also, I like to use humour with my students, not everything so serious, and trust them to make their decisions. But I'm wondering if you have some tips or steps to building a positive classroom culture?
Yeah, I do, and I think this is really relevant for anyone in a system supports position, anyone who's looking to try and support schools to build those, because I mean, a classroom culture is just a subculture of your broader culture. So what we want to do is to get down to that level and say, well, are we building the kinds of cultures at a sub-level in the classroom that we're looking for? And it's an old truism that sits deep within that restorative framework, which is for me is around firm and fair. And I go firm and fair, I guess, to story this for you. When I first began teaching, I landed in a school which was a special school and a significant amount of high-end behavioural challenges right across the school. And a teacher there gave me that well-worn advice, which was don't smile at Easter. And I went in the first couple of weeks as a graduate teacher taking that advice, and I was mean and horrible, just trying to set high expectations, because I had that focus on high expectations and they're not going to get the better of me, and I was miserable. So I went home then and I thought, right, this isn't working, I need to change this. And so I went fair. And as they came in the next week, we focused on relationships. We played icebreaker games. We cooked together. We had a fantastic time for a couple of weeks while I got to know them. And I thought, you know what? I've got these kids in the palm of my hand. They're mine now. I can do whatever I like with them. And so then I started to fold back in the academic expectations, and kabang. The students didn't, we don't do this, or what happened to all the games and the basketball and the food, and where'd that all go? We're not doing this. This is stupid. And I realised what I was doing was flip-flopping between two equally important concepts, the idea of being firm and the idea of being fair. So I think in supporting teachers and in supporting schools to be able to be firm and fair, we need to understand that it's the combination of firm and fair that matters the most. So recently I had a school that I work with whose behaviour and wellbeing team said to me that we've been listening to your stuff around relationships and being fair, and and they said what we're going to do is for our first 3 weeks of the year, they said we're going to focus wholly on relationship building for all of our teachers. So there's no curriculum imperative, there's no pressure. They just said for the first 3 weeks of the year, we're just going to get to know each other and build these cultures in the classroom. And they said that's what we're going to do. What do you reckon? And I said, no, thanks. And they said, why not? I said, because I don't want to teach in your school in week 4. When you finally throw in expectations out of the blue, I think that's flip-flopping model. And if we were genuinely firm and fair, we wouldn't have kids colouring in the front page of their maths book in week 1. We would have kids getting some maths done, because then as educators we get to thank and congratulate them for that, and we get to tell them we are going to do some awesome stuff this year, aren't we? That's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. You've managed to finish with 5 minutes spare. Now you can colour in the front page of your maths book if you want. So it's about, if you want expectations to work, if we want firmness, if we want high levels of expectation, the way that we engender that is to marry it with just as high a level of support. So that's where the fairness comes in. And only when we're high in both could we actually say that we're, 1, authoritative in the classroom, and 2, that we are respectful in the classroom. We don't respect people who are wishy-washy. We don't respect people who kick our backsides all the time. We respect people who have incredibly high expectations of us and then support us like crazy to reach those expectations. So I think that that's a methodology that stands for new teachers like yourself, Jess. I think it's a methodology that stands for existing and experienced teachers. I think it stands for school leaders, and I think it stands for anybody who's at a system level who's looking to support schools. How is it that your people are reflecting on how firm and fair they are as a means for being consistent? How's that go for you, Jess?
That sounds good. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. All right. Well, I'm so glad we've been able to answer Jess's question. I'm just gonna give you just a few more minutes here. I'm mindful that I don't want to waffle and to waste the time of anyone else who might be here today. So I can see those names there. I'm going to give you a few minutes before we start to wind up today. So if you've got any other questions, either put your hand up or pop something in the question box now. It's a little bit of speak now or forever hold your peace kind of moment. Okay, I'll give you just a couple moments longer. And it's okay, because this is allowed to be a bit clunky. It's not a slick presentation when you're doing Q&A. Conversations are always just a little bit filled with pauses and ums and ahs, and that's absolutely fine. Okay, good, good. All right, I'm going to leave you there. Thank you so much for attending and for coming along today. I really appreciate it. It's an important topic. And we've got some other sessions coming up, so please make sure you're accessing the PLI website and that you're looking for, we've got another Q&A session that we're running for parents this week. So if there are parents in your schools and your school that you know would benefit from that, please let them know. That one's going to be run on Wednesday evening. And there's a couple of other webinar opportunities on Thursday that I'd love to have both school leaders and classroom practitioners involved in. All right, thanks everyone. Talk to you soon.